This is one that is being planned and carried out. Chapter 13. The Endgame Part 2. So let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic as if it was a crime, who had the motive and who gained from it and in which ways. All the evidence points directly to it being created and released either purposely or accidentally from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, and we know that some form of gain of research was taking place there with involvement from Dr. Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak, so that has to bring us back to a statement that Dr. Fauci made early on in Donald Trump's presidency. His exact quote was, "There is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak." So anyone could easily say, well, he was making a point that there were previous surprise outbreaks like the H1N1 swine flu outbreak, or something along those lines, which sure is a valid point, but what is interesting to me is the date when he made those statements, which was January 11th, 2017. The reason why 2017 is interesting is because if we go back to the earlier chapter in this book about the SPARS pandemic scenario and booklet, it was finished in October of 2017. And anyone who reads the SPARS pandemic can clearly see it as a walkthrough of how leadership should navigate the COVID-19 pandemic for upper government officials so as to have plausible deniability. Donald Trump was a very polarizing individual who was treated unlike any president in history by the media. Forget about what you think about him, whether you like him or not doesn't matter. What we can agree on was from day one there was massive collusion to have him removed from office. From the Russia collusion hoax to the multiple failed impeachment attempts, it was very clear that the media, big tech, and elements of the government were doing anything they could to have him removed. Violent riots were now being called fiery but peaceful. In fact, Kamala Harris was helping support a bail fund that was bailing out violent protesters. Statues were being brought down. Government buildings and police stations were being burned to the ground, and Antifa foot soldiers were inducing fear in the streets, similar to the way the brown shirts were used in Nazi Germany to use physical violence to stop discussion and intimidate enemies of the Nazi Party. We now know that the FBI and the media colluded to hide the Hunter Biden laptop, which is said to contain disturbing images involving children, as well as extreme evidence of pay-to-play deals with his father that Hunter was navigating behind the scenes, 10% for the big guy. So why was it so important to oust Trump? Is it because all of a sudden the FBI and the media had decided his mean tweets were just too dangerous and something had to be done? Or maybe when we look at Trump's policies like withdrawing from the UN and announcing a withdrawal from the WHO in his potential second term. We now know that the UN and WHO are a major part of the upcoming plans to form an extremely powerful alliance that could dictate which direction the world is going, with people like Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab at the helm of the ship. The USA is the most important chess piece that needed to be knocked down in order to complete this plan, and with Trump not allowing these organizations to take the power of the country they wanted, they had to go into overdrive to have him removed. We know the COVID-19 pandemic negatively affected Trump's chances of being voted back in for a second term in 2020, from riots in the streets to almost entirely negative news and late-night talk show coverage of Trump. Again, remember who is paying for these programs. It was clear collusion on almost every level, and of course, I'm not saying Trump is perfect. There are many good reasons to dislike him, but we also know that the COVID-19 pandemic caused a change in the 2020 election where far more ballots were mailed in, which of course caused a much more likely chance of voter fraud. So then we can remember back to 2016 to 2020 when everybody and their brother were saying Trump and Russia stole the 2016 election. No evidence was ever offered that held up, and Adam Schiff himself and many others pushing the hoax admitted under oath they had no evidence of it. That message was on every major news outlet, every newspaper, every late-night TV show. It was perfectly fine and encouraged to say that Trump didn't win. You could say it on Facebook and Twitter, and not only would you not get banned, but you would likely be promoted. So now, after an unprecedented and controversial election in 2020, all of a sudden the rules changed. Questioning an election was now not allowed on Facebook or Twitter, and if you did it, you were a violence-inciting conspiracy theorist. So how did this change, and why did it change? It really shows two clear different sets of rules, but I also think that it shows something else. It shows massive collusion by the most powerful parts of big tech and the media to interfere with a democratic election. Whether you like Trump or not, surely you think elections should be fair, I would hope. Just last week, Mark Zuckerberg admitted on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast that the FBI personally asked Facebook to block people's ability to discuss the Hunter Biden laptop, which we now know was enough to alter the results of the election, with many Biden voters admitting that if they had known about the laptop prior to voting, that they would not have voted for Biden. So again, why was this so important, and why are these forces still to this day trying to silence and prevent Trump from another run? Do you really think the FBI just really wants to protect you from the Orange Man's mean tweets? Or maybe his policies, removing the USA from UN and who control, were throwing a major wrench into the plans that these people have been working on? On. I think common sense says that they would not be this desperate unless gaining political control of the USA's future policies was of extreme importance. Let's not forget the USA is one of the last real beacons of free speech and freedom to self protection. It is pretty much the king piece of the chessboard. If you can take it down, you win the match. So, the timing of the COVID-19 pandemic, right before maybe one of the most important elections of our time that would affect the way people voted, is no small piece of evidence. I think it is a very important piece of circumstantial evidence. It wouldn't have taken a genius to know that a released virus and lockdowns would affect the economy and people's lives and would harm a potential presidential run. This last section about Trump was controversial, and I was questioning whether to include it due to the polarizing nature of Donald Trump, but I chose to include it to point out some disturbing coincidences and obvious collusion. So, again, who profited from the COVID-19 pandemic? It is said to be the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. The drug companies profited massively. Those who invested in the drug companies profited massively. Large chains like Walmart and the big chain grocery stores profited massively, while small owner-operated businesses were forced to close, many permanently, which then extended more profits to the large chains.